More and more people are discovering that Vatican II said Gregorian chant should be given pride of place. But the very next sentence also praises sacred polyphony in a special way. What is sacred polyphony? Because an example is worth 1,000 words, we will examine a piece of sacred polyphony. It is a Kyrie by Guerrero, and the structure is divided into 3 different sections, for obvious reasons. Before we listen to this composition, let's take a moment and examine the techniques used by Guerrero. Then we'll listen to the piece, which was chosen because it's very short. As was customary in those days, Guerrero's setting is based on an ancient chant called Beata Mater. We won't be listening to the first section, but we encourage you to do so when you're done watching this video. Guerrero takes that first part there, just 5 notes, and turns it into a marvelous song. Nor do we have time to discuss the second section, where Guerrero uses material from the second part of the chant in a wonderful manner. We will explore the third section, which is primarily based on the third section of the chant melody. By the way, if all this sounds a bit mathematical, remember that structural balance and proportionality were highly valued by the great composers. The soprano repeats this melody 3 times, but each time, Guerrero changes the rhythm to make things more interesting. Forget about the alto and bass for a moment. Let's listen only to the soprano and tenor lines. Are your ears able to hear the chant melody? By the way, the soprano and tenor are not the only ones who sing that melody. Forget about the alto and tenor for a second. Listen only to the soprano and bass. Do you hear the chant melody? If you think it's easy to add chant melodies like these, think again, because the vocal lines are written according to special rules. The easier type of rules concern horizontal items, rhythm, which intervals follow in which direction, and so forth. The more challenging rules concern the vertical relationships. The vertical ones are fairly easy with only 2 voices, but when more voices are added, things become more difficult. Those who have carefully examined this music realize that even though it sounds simple and natural, what the composer has done is incredibly complex. Theorists in those days didn't always describe vertical relationships the way we do now, but they were there nevertheless. Indeed, ignorance of the vertical relationships is one of the easiest ways to recognize a modern composer trying to copy the masters. When we take away the tenor and alto voices, and if you listen very carefully, you'll be able to hear a note nobody is singing. That's called an overtone, and the overtone series had an influence on how the rules came into being. When composers follow the rules, like Guerrero and his colleagues always did, the results are truly stunning and never get old. Forget about the soprano and bass for a moment. Just listen to the alto and tenor. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart once gave an excellent definition of counterpoint. He said, "When one voice moves, the other one does not. When one voice goes up, the other goes down." Even in a tiny little piece like this, Guerrero accomplishes marvels. For example, toward the very end, forget about the soprano for a moment. Listen only to the alto, tenor, and bass, who together form a type of stretto, which would later become a favorite technique of Johann Sebastian Bach. We've reached the end now, and in a moment we will listen to the full piece. However, please realize that no microphone can capture the sonic effect of live polyphony, because polyphony wasn't composed for the microphone. For example, listen to just the men's voices. Do you see how the rules of polyphony are still engrossing, even when two voices are missing? Now let's listen with all the voices. This was recorded by a few members of the volunteer choir of the new FSSP apostolate in Los Angeles. When you hear the harmonious results of rules being followed, see whether you agree with Dr. William Mart that polyphonic music reflects in a marvelous way the perfect order of God's creation. More importantly, however, consider in your heart whether Vatican II was correct to recommend polyphony as particularly suitable when it comes to fostering a prayerful attitude at the Holy Mass. After all this, we can put forward this definition for your consideration. Feel free to pause the video and read it. As time went on, the rules did not remain unchanged. In fact, they were developed and built upon by serious composers who, rather than trying to mimic the past, spoke in a contemporary musical language. Here are a few examples, but more could easily be added. The original thought behind this video was to give concrete examples of contemporary church music offensive from a musical perspective. However, a high-ranking cleric who has been supportive of Watershed since the very beginning said to us that it is better to promote what is positive rather than denigrate what is negative, and he is correct. In light of his sound advice, we chose to focus on the excellence of polyphony. We would briefly note, however, that much contemporary church music is published by composers who seem ignorant of the glorious traditions of Roman Catholic choral music. This short video hopefully gave you a tiny glimpse into this world. It's also important to remember that before musicians can replace the propers with songs or hymns, each alternate text must be approved by the local bishop. When it comes to replacing the Mass propers, the general instruction has always made reference to the local bishop and does not make reference to the bishop of some other diocese. Many people don't even realize the ordinary form has propers, which are assigned to each Mass. Approved English translations for these propers can be found in many books, including the Simple English Propers, the St. Isaac Jogues Lectionary, and the Graduale Parvum. While it is true that the Bishops' Conference has authority to approve texts replacing the propers, this has never been done in the United States. Great confusion has resulted over the last 40 years due to USCCB wording printed in countless hymnals. Because so many people erroneously thought this approval applied to the hymns and songs, the USCCB recently changed the wording to make things absolutely clear.